Ignatius Press and the Augustine Institute present the Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter. If you like us, please help us by subscribing and by reviewing us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you might listen. And don't forget to sign up for weekly updates and study questions at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.
Welcome back to the Formed Book Club with Father Fessio, Vivian Dudro, Joseph Pierce. We are going to conclude our discussion of Joseph Cardinal Zen's book, For Love of My People, I Will Not Remain Silent, subtitled On the Situation of the Church in China. A book which is quite topical and contemporary, but I also think will remain of value for some time to come because China's not going away. And unfortunately, the Communist Party is not going away, at least not anytime soon, I think. So the relation between the Church and the Chinese Communist Party is, I think, important for us to know about. Any other preludial statements that you want to make, Vivian or Joseph?
Well, this is the hardest hitting chapter by far, or section that we've read.
It is.
He really comes out
blazing.
Swinging.
Yeah.
So put your seatbelts on, everybody.
Exactly.
I would say one thing as well, absolutely not to disagree with you, Vivian, but I do think you're completely correct. He comes out fighting, but considering, what he's been through, what his fellow bishops and faithful have been through in China, I think he's very restrained. I think he's very reasoned and balanced. And of course, under the surface, he's got to feel frustrated at what's happened in the last few years. And he actually pulls his punches more than I would, but that's more because he's hungrier than I,
Okay. Well, and this is something, let's be clear, that Catholics and others of goodwill can have disagreements on. It's a prudential policy of how you deal with a different government and so on as a church. But clearly, he is comparing the present Vatican relationship with Rome as Ostpolitik, that was under Casaroli, Secretary of State, and Paul VI and John the 23rd, which he believes, and George Weigel believes, was a failed diplomatic effort. But he might be wrong. As Chesterton says in an essay we'll be covering in a couple of weeks, history does not repeat itself because it's governed by human beings who do all things differently. So on chapter 6, he's doing kind of a careful exegesis or description of Pope Benedict's letter of 2007. And so this chapter is called The Content of the Letter, the Situation of the Church in China. I am going to see
the
what
first thing I have on that is 99. So I don't know if anybody is prior to that.
Go ahead.
Well, there's the first paragraph on that page strikes me as being very relevant in perhaps a paradoxical and not obvious way. If I might read that paragraph and then comment upon it.
Sure.
For many years, the Church of Hong Kong has backed the Pope in his encouragement by acting as a bridge between the two communities. When we hear criticism from the official community against the underground community, we defend the latter by saying that their position is legitimate. Instead, when we hear the underground community criticize the official community as if they were all traitors to the church, we say, no, not all of them, because we know these brothers. We have lived together for a long time. Many of them are strong and brave, upholding the true faith while being in such an unfavorable structure. Now, apart from really encapsulating in one paragraph the dilemma that the whole book's about, the thing that struck me is the situation we've had in our COVIDious times, and all of us know that there's been divisions within society, within the church, between shall we say the pro-cautionary end of the COVIDious spectrum and the less cautionary end of the covidius spectrum. All right, and I think that one thing that has been lost up to a point in that scenario is caritas, is charity, and when we start condemning or criticizing our brothers for being on the opposite end of the spectrum to us, and lacking charity, we're already on the wrong side because we lack charity.
Would you put on your Would you put on your mask, please?
Or not on your life, Father. No, but regardless of what side I am on in that discussion,
that's right.
I've always tried to be understanding and charitable towards those who see things differently, for whatever reason. Sometimes there are good reasons for that particular individual, right? For that particular person to be. Well, all right. So confession. I'm the less cautionary end of the spectrum, but there's good reasons for friends of mine to be more cautionary than I am. But the point is that we have to love each other. And when I see people that are actually lacking charity because of a difference, it reminds me of this situation. You can imagine in China, if you're struggling in the underground church, right, against the Chinese Communist Party, and you see other Catholics who have, in your judgment, capitulated the Chinese Communist Party, it's very easy to lose charity. Right? And so I think that what Cardinal Zen does here in this paragraph is really encapsulate when we find ourselves in times of struggle, in times of dilemma, in times of conflict, what's the first rule for all Christians? Is to be charitable to our neighbor and indeed to our enemy, which is harder. And I think it's encapsulated in that paragraph in a way which is absolutely applicable to China, but applicable to situations and scenarios beyond China.
Yeah, I marked that paragraph also in this chapter, and I think it's particularly important not only in itself, but as a background for what he says in the last chapter, because he's quite harsh in his criticisms of certain people. And yet you see here, he and others have tried to act as a bridge to try and make sure there's reconciliation possible.
I might add also that you said, Father, that history doesn't repeat itself, or quoting Chesterton saying that. And while it doesn't exactly, there are things that are familiar that come back around. And so this situation of people underground, attacking the people above ground as cowards and so on, this has happened during other periods of persecution of the church, including the very beginning. I mean, after the Edict of Milan, there was this big question. Gee, are the people who've been living these compromised lives really Christians, or only those of us who've been underground in hiding and so on? It was difficult to bring these communities together once Christianity was legal. And Joseph, given your study of recrusancy in England, you probably saw similar kinds of things, right?
Yeah. So again, it is. We are permitted to argue with giants, even giants like Chesterton. And yes, history doesn't repeat itself in the sense that it's a mechanism, because human free will, of course, is a major component of history. But there are anthropological patterns and providential patterns. In other words, we are who we are as human beings, and that's going to impact the way that we behave in certain situations. And God is nonetheless in charge. So those two patterns, if you like, they are the fabric of history. So you do see it in Elizabethan and Jacobean England, but I think even more pertinent to this discussion, in Russia, when after the fall of the Soviet Union, those Russian Orthodox people that were underground and militantly anti-Soviet against those that were trying to sort of come to some sort of modus vivendi with the government, and there's a lot of recriminations about who should we accept those people now. And again, same in Poland, same in other countries. So what we're seeing in China is we have seen it in the past, and not just in the Tudor past and the Jacobean past, but in the very recent communist past in Eastern Europe.
And I think someone said that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
There you go.
Very good. Whoever said that, he's very good. Yes, absolutely.
All right, I won't say Google it because I want to get off of Google, but you can go to DuckDuckGo.
Yeah, and by the way, the past tense for DuckDuckGo is DuckDuck went. Okay.
Well, the word devil means divide, right? And you know, stirring up
Okay.
divisions is always the work of the enemy. And it's interesting how that quote you gave, Joseph, the end of it, the last line of that section, never sharpen divisions, but try to narrow the gap.
Right.
This,
Absolutely. But
this is what we always must do as Christians in all kinds of situations, because the temptation is to divide and to go after each other. We end up with a circular firing line, and we're, beating up each other. And yeah, that's
Yes,
all.
but as one who's been publicly accused of being divisive or divisive or both, I like to quote Jesus where he says, "I've not come to bring peace but a sword, and I will divide father against mother," and so on. Because what happens these days, if you stand up for the truth, not as your own personal truth, but as the church has proclaimed it for 2,000 years, you're becoming divisive, right? So we got to be careful.
That's why one of the key components of this book has been the difference between reconciliation, which is good, and unity, which is not good if it means getting in bed with the devil. So, we do have to love our neighbor, but not to the point of view of getting in bed with the neighbor if the neighbor's actually committing serious sin. We don't have to join him in that serious sin. In fact, we have to refuse. We are meant to love our neighbor. We're not meant to actually join our neighbor in our neighbor's error. And that, I think, is at the heart of the conundrum and the dilemma of this book, is the difference between reconciliation, loving our neighbor and loving our enemy, but not actually surrendering to objective evil. And the Chinese Communist Party is an objectively evil entity.
Well, Jesus was the only one who perfectly in himself unified truth and charity. And the rest of us mere mortals are constantly struggling to keep those two things together at the same time. So
right.
We're working on the convergence. That's what we're doing.
Yes, we're working on the convergence. And speaking of convergences and unity and reconciliation, I've never thought more about ecclesiology than I have while reading this book, because a good deal of the conversation here is about, what is the church in its essence? Well, we know that those four attributes, right? One, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, that all those marks of the church have to be there for the true church to be there. And the one part and the apostolic part, I must say, I often think of it kind of superficially. And when you read something like this and you realize how absolutely essential they are to the church being herself, and when these things are being eroded by people wanting political power, what a horrible position to be put in. When it's bad enough when we're the source of our own divisions, that's already bad enough. But now you have a totalitarian regime deliberately attacking the church's unity and the church's apostolic.
And which is even sadder, Vivian, because we expect the devil to be devilish. Even sadder is the capitulation of powerful members of the church who, for whatever reason, decide that they want to get in bed with the devil. And again, this isn't new. Throughout patterns of history, it's happened throughout the 2,000 years of the church's history, starting with Judas. But in the Roman Curia today, there clearly, as is clear in the final chapter of this book, there are Judases.
Well, I want to go back to a point, Vivian, because it gives you an opportunity to paraphrase one of my homilies, which I gave during Eastertide. Because, of course, Eastertide is when we celebrate the resurrection and the spread of the faith. We read the Acts of the Apostles. But at a certain point in the early church's enthusiastic zeal, there was this division whether or not the Gentile converts should have to follow the customs of Moses. And there was great animosity within the church. So what happened? Paul and Barnabas went to Jerusalem, and it says that the apostles and the presbyters, priests, the elders, decided to come together, and they had their first council. So even in the early church, in the midst of that, the purity of the faith, so to speak, we had these divisions beginning. And what happened? How were they solved? they came to the apostles and the presbyters. There was an authority there that could preserve the unity. And of course, Jesus recognized the need for that authority when he established his church, because otherwise there's no possibility of remaining one. And this is, of course, Cardinal Zen's concern. He wants the unity of the church, but not at the expense of compromising on fundamentals of the faith. That's why he started with ecclesiology, but the fact that we cannot have a civil government appointing our bishops.
Right, and he notes that this is moving ahead maybe farther than we want to go right now, but he note on page 133, some will say that historically emperors had the power to appoint bishops. Yes, but they were Catholic emperors.
Right.
Who favored the church, and still problems developed. Fortunately, that way of doing things is now history.
But the point is, even
having good shepherds is too important for the life of the church.
Yeah.
How can we deliver the flock into the mouths of rapacious wolves?
So the key thing there is, of course, that even when Caesar was Christian, he was corrupt. You know, that if the Holy Roman Emperor is appointing popes, there's something radically wrong, and the church should oppose the appointment of bishops by Christian Caesars, and certainly by communist, atheistic Caesars.
Yes, well, let's move to chapter 7, the content of the letter, relation between the church and state, and this really comes to that very point, Joseph. What is that relationship, you know?
Exactly.
Well, I think we've actually talked about that. I think we probably kind of covered that indirectly, at least, have we not, in our present discussion here?
Well, yeah, I've got something on page 126, which might be sort of a practical exemplar of what we're talking about. So maybe we could look at that.
Sure.
So you're talking about this person, Mr. Liu Beinian. I'm not sure that my Chinese pronunciation is awful. Who's basically, according to Cardinal Zen, a member of the Chinese Communist Party, but certainly the official communist overseer of the official church. And in this is paragraph in the middle of page 126. When traveling abroad with some bishops, he is always the group leader, right? So he's not a bishop, but he's always the group leader, the one who speaks. Once the foreign host said, "There are some bishops here. Can they talk?" He then pointed to Bishop Fang Xiangyo and said, "You talk." So he's ordered one particular bishop to talk, presumably the one he hopes is going to say the right thing. The latter became quite nervous, and as he was talking, he always looked over at Mr. Liu Banyan. At the end, he asked, "I didn't make mistakes, did I? But the foreigners knew Chinese." How disgraceful for the bishop. This encapsulates really, in an absolute concrete, incarnate sense, the dilemma that people that are trying to live with the devil are facing. And I mean, in some ways, we should feel sorry for them. I mean, I don't want to condemn this bishop, but you do see the problem.
Yes.
The official church is overseen by the Chinese Communist Party. This is a problem.
And then he concludes that sort of episode with, on page 127, the top of the bottom paragraph, "We have reason to believe that he, this Mr. Benyan, is a member of the Communist Party." So,
and then he gives evidence for
it. The devil, and
he gives evidence thereafter as well. That's important, Vivian. He gives evidence. I'm not saying you should read it, but you say, okay, you say that, but what's the evidence? And he gives the evidence.
Exactly.
Well, if I may interject something, another personal thing, the topic of how bishops should treat politicians who promote abortion has become quite relevant again after Archbishop Carolina's wonderful pastoral letter. But years ago, I was in Denver when Archbishop Chaput was the archbishop, and he was talking about this very thing. And he became a little bit compromised, and he said, "I hope that's okay with Father Fessio." So,
right, but at least you're a believer, Father.
That's right.
That's good, right?
I'm not a member of the Communist Party.
Gracias.
Although, as we'll see in the final chapter, this Bishop or Archbishop Sorondo says that China is the place which is most perfectly embodied the Church's social teaching.
Oh my goodness. What's horrid about that?
Yeah.
Actually, is that where you want to go?
Well, I don't know. Shall we go?
Page 140?
We can go there.
Yeah.
Let's go with the flow that Father Fezio has, because afterward, Father, would that be okay?
Yeah, and we can. That's right. You may speak, Joseph.
No, Vivian may speak. If it's okay with you, Father.
What's so horrifying about the context of that comment that Father just quoted from Bishop Sorondo, that China's the best implementer of Catholic social doctrine. This is on page 140. What's so horrifying about the context of this is that he had been a guest of honor, invites as a criminal, a guest of honor to an organ transplant symposium. Precisely the criminal who is under investigation by international experts for trafficking in organs taken from living people. And a very dear friend of mine is a member of a sect that has its origins in China, and these are among the people who are being imprisoned, prisoners of conscience, whose organs are being harvested and sold. And this has been covered in some detail now by a congressional commission here in the United States. I don't know if I can't think of the name now of the congressman who's been in charge of these investigations, but this business about this organ harvesting has been documented. It's not simply rumors being spread to defame the Communist Party or China or anything else. And where do you even begin when you have a Catholic bishop who doesn't either know, is so ignorant not to know what's really going on, has had the wool pulled over his eyes, or he does know and can say something like this?
Right, yeah, ignorance or absolute evil. But even leaving aside the market in organs that have been harvested from dissidents, I mean, the one-child policy. How can any bishop of the church talk about the Chinese Communist Party being in accordance with Catholic social teaching when they've actually had an enforced abortion policy? Not that abortion is permissible and legal, but it's actually enforced by the government. It belies belief that anybody, any bishop of the church could say that and not be excommunicated, quite frankly.
Well, it's not the only stupid thing he said, by the way. I mean, in one of the Pope's first encyclicals, when talked about climate change and turning down your air conditioners, he actually said that in an encyclical. Sorondo comes on and says, that's magisterium. Just as much as against abortion, that's magisterium. What? No, I mean, okay.
He doesn't get it. Yeah, right, exactly. At best, he doesn't get it.
So,
at best.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, I don't like to publicly criticize because it may, bishops, because we want to have respect for bishops. But when they say stupid things, I think the respect we have for them should mean to say, especially if it's obviously stupid, we say, look, it's stupid. We don't do stupid around here.
Yeah.
Go on, Joseph.
Go ahead, Joseph.
No, it's just that, yes, we do want to support the bishops, but we can't support the bishops if they are not being true to the magisterium of the church. And they do need to be called to task if they're not being true to the magisterium of the church. And more to the point, I think I'm not preaching division amongst the bishops, but I do believe that far too often good, solid Orthodox bishops do not speak up because of the collegiality. They don't want to be seen to be divisive amongst the bishops. So we allow this heresy to be promulgated by senior members of the church without good, solid bishops speaking up because of, again, it's the same thing about the difference between unity and reconciliation, right? You can't have a unity where there is none. There is no unity between these sorts of bishops who preach heresy and the good, solid bishops. The solid bishops have to stand up and be counted.
Well, and in this... go ahead, Vivian.
I was just going to say, to Cardinal Zen's credit, the previous page on or a couple previous pages anyway, 137, he does talk about this crop of Latin American bishops and Pope Francis having maybe a different understanding of China and communism, perhaps ignorant. But he puts it like this: Pope Francis is a man full of love and has great compassion for the poor and the weak, but he has no experience of real communism in power. He knows the communists of Latin America, where they are the voice of the people who have suffered persecution. I'm wondering if that's really the right word. But in any case, Pope Francis naturally has a lot of sympathy for them, meaning communists. And we've seen this on the part of some of the Latin American bishops now working in the Vatican, the same kind of idealized view of communism because they're the voice of the downtrodden in their countries of origin. But what they really know about what's really going in China, well, I would say to them, you have a duty to know. Before you open your mouth, you have a duty to get the facts of what's going on from the people on the ground there and not, say such ridiculous remarks like this.
But do you know the paradox here, Vivian, is that the belief of these South American bishops, you would say, or liberation theologians, is what they would say, I'm playing devil's advocate here, is that I'm now also paraphrasing Chesterton, that communism is not something which has been tried and found wanting. It's been wanted and not tried. In other words, what Chesterton says about Christianity, these people say about communism. All right. No, okay, so yeah, it hasn't worked so far, but it will work if we give it a chance. The point is that where Christianity has been tried, we see the saints. Where communism has been tried, we see the French Revolution, we see Joseph Stalin, we see Lenin, we see Hitler, if you want to count National Socialism amongst it, we see Mao Zedong, and we see certainly over 100 million people in the body count so far. So it has been tried and it has been found wanting. So there's no excuse for people to say, well, they don't know what communism is. No, the problem is the ignorance of history, right? And to turn a blind eye to the, quite frankly, bloody obvious.
Well, in this last chapter, what must we do? And of course, his answers, we must go back to Pope Benedict's letter. He's very critical. He names names, and they're mainly people in the Roman Curia. And he also says, as you mentioned, that Holy Father may not understand communism as well as people who lived under it in power, but he does say on page 141, third way down, I will never lead a rebellion against the Pope. I will quietly withdraw the monastic life of prayer and penance. However, the title of this book is, For Love of My People, I Will Not Remain Silent. And so, to me, even if he's wrong, which I happen to think he's not, but even if he's wrong, he is making his criticism in the right spirit. He's saying, well, I think this is a mistake, and here's who's made it, and here's why they made it, but I'm not going to be a rebel against the church. I'm a Catholic, I'm with the Pope. I'm not going to be a rebel.
Father, first of all, I would like to thank Ignatius Press for publishing this, because I hadn't read it before it being assigned, so to speak, for the Thorn Book Club. And you've done a great service to the church to make this public and to decimate what it's saying, to disseminate what it's saying. I want to say something here which is really brings it home and it really hammers it home. And that same page, 141. I remember an expression that appeared a long time ago on a Catholic website in China. For many years, our enemies have failed to make us die. Probably kill us might have been a better. Now we have to die at the hands of our Father. No, that really. And then what do you say? All right, let's go and die. If we are going to be martyred for our loyalty to the church and our own Father betrays us, we'll die. That says it all.
It does.
On a happier note.
Well, that's pretty happy in a sense.
Deo gratias. Deo gratias.
I found it very interesting on pages 143 and 144. where he compares, he's obviously been comparing the Ostpolitik, meaning East, meaning dealing with Eastern Europe, with the policies being tried with China. So he's been making this comparison. And here he compares Vietnam.
Yes, that was very
Poland.
interesting. Yes.
Comparing Vietnam with Poland, that there is hope here, that in Vietnam, even though there's communists in power, even though there's been a brutal suppression of Catholicism in that country, even before the communists, even though the church remains strong. But what does he say? The well-rooted faith of the people manages to get good bishops despite the government's efforts to control everything. He's saying in Vietnam.
Amen.
I think this is something that happened in Poland.
Yeah.
And then I love this. The gentlemen of the Vatican delude themselves if they think they are still among the big players of world politics.
Yeah, exactly.
And then he says that the church did not die because Ostpolitik saved it, because the faith of those people saved it. And so
I think
I never thought of Vietnam and Poland in the same breath before.
Well, I mean, Vietnam didn't have the penetration of Catholicism in the history like Poland did. Nevertheless, we know with Diem, there was a very strong Catholic presence of an indigenous presence, of widespread presence, respected presence. So I can see how in Vietnam they can have the kind of resistance to the communist control that the Poles did. Whereas in China, with 1.5 billion people, or 1.3, whatever it is, I mean, the Catholic Church, even the Christian communities are very small minorities compared to the whole. So it's harder to do the Vietnam or the Polish thing in China.
Yeah, I agree. But I would thank you, Vivian, for reminding us of the silver lining to the cloud. There always is, of course. Silver lining is above all shadows rise the sun, as that great prophet Samwise Gamgee says. So thank you for being the Samwise Gamgee of this evening. Father, you want to mention?
Let's look forward to next week.
Yes.
I mean, ladies and gentlemen, and those are the only two categories I will recognize among our hearers and viewers. We're going to have fun now for the next several weeks because we're going to be discussing a collection of essays which was partially composed or brought together by Joseph Pearce, along with Dale Alquist and Aidan Mackey, The Outline of Sanity, which is basically the best essays of G.K. Chesterton. And there's so much here to discuss. We'll never exhaust it because he's inexhaustible, although he's exhausting sometimes. But we are going to take 10 essays a week. So essays from 1 to 10 we'll begin with next week. And anything else I should say about that, Joseph or Vivian?
I think you pretty much covered it.
Vivian? All right, well, this will be, for those who are not familiar with Chesterton, this will be an eye-opener for you. For those who are, it'll be a treat. So God bless you all, and welcome to our next session coming up of the Formed Book Club.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Formed Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.